Hey, hi, and hello, it's Capital 10 again, and today I'd like to talk about Dynasty Warriors. Now, this video may seem counterintuitive given that you're currently watching me play a Samurai Warriors title, but rest assured, it'll cycle back around. Also, spoilers for this game and the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story moving forward, and apologies if I mispronounce some names, I promise I'm trying my best. So, I love Dynasty Warriors, as do a lot of others on this platform. But as you may have heard from some of these other voices, the current state of the series leaves more than a little to be desired. The currently penultimate entry in the main line of games, Dynasty Warriors 8, was very well received and quite possibly the best this series has to offer, although I struggle to denounce my own personal bias in favor of 4. However, there was then a half-decade hiatus as we waited for the next installment, and the most recent entry in the main line of games, Dynasty Warriors 9, was very poorly received and quite possibly the worst this series has to offer, unless you're dead set on shunning 6 for all eternity. In short, Dynasty Warriors 9 offered a bland experience in terms of open world gameplay, quote unquote, coupled with horrible voice acting, and the cherry on top was the multitude of glitches that essentially broke the game. Now, confession time. I never actually played Dynasty Warriors 9. I saw the online hate for the title and judged what gameplay was provided to be a poor excuse for a AAA outing, and at full price no less. Although looking at it now, I still don't think it merits the price tag despite being heavily discounted. Unless I need it for a video in the future, I doubt I'll ever pick it up. So that's the current state of the franchise. In a word, it's in disarray. Luckily, there's no shortage of content for me to binge that agrees with said sentiment and bashes this particular game into the ground. However, as cathartic as that may be, it seems a tad stuck in the present. At best, we've received Dynasty Warriors 9 Empires, and the cycle of ire has shifted forward, but it doesn't move the narrative past these dark ages we find ourselves in. I, for one, have grown curious about what lies ahead for the series. Correct me if I'm wrong by commenting below, but I've seen scarce few talking about the prospective Dynasty Warriors 10. It may be naive of me to believe that Koei Tecmo would be willing to drastically alter the series moving forward so as to address the fan base's concerns, but I like to think of myself as an optimist. So, if they were to change up the formula, what direction would they take it in? Samurai Warriors 5, at the time of this video's upload, is the newest offering in the Samurai franchise. I'm not sure if there were complaints about the franchise's roster starting to suffer from bloat, or perhaps the style stagnating after too many similar entries, but Koei Tecmo decided it was time to shake things up. Samurai Warriors 5 sliced down the roster to about 2/3 the size of the previous numbered title, adopted a new art style, and focused the campaign primarily on one faction with a second perspective unlocked later down the line. And to top it all off, they actually changed the model of 2 characters to reflect them aging. Granted, some of these practices already came about in the spirit of Sanada, but that was a spin-off. I don't imagine many people expected such drastic changes to come about in one of the mainline titles. Overall, love it or hate it, you'd be hard-pressed to argue that they didn't refresh the experience of the games. So, having discussed the variation in form that was Samurai Warriors 5, let's consider the possibility that Dynasty Warriors 10 receives the same treatment. In today's video, I'd like to construct my own version of this potential title in the same vein as how Samurai Warriors was revamped. Let's start with the visual style since I don't actually have that much to say concerning the matter. In my personal opinion, I think Samurai Warriors 5 looks gorgeous. Its colorful palette intertwined with heavy outlines and shading provide it with a picturesque presentation that looks as though someone painted every frame of gameplay. This is also abundantly apparent when a character finishes their Musou attack and a splash screen pops up depicting intricate artwork such as crashing waves, for example. It's like they took famous paintings like the Great Wave off Kanagawa by Hokusai and just slapped them into the code. With that in mind, I'm all for a similar integration into the next Dynasty Warriors entry. The issue with this hope, however, is that the art style, as previously stated, is reminiscent of Japanese culture. The aesthetic blends in swimmingly to a title focused on feudal Japan, but can the same work when incorporated into a story set in the Three Kingdoms era of China? I certainly think so for 2 reasons. Firstly, Koei Tecmo has always played extremely fast and loose with context and accuracy to the setting. Just look at Strike Force if you want an example. And secondly, this is a Japanese company at the end of the day, so it's not to say that they can't incorporate their own influences into their own version of ancient China. So, all in all, I say this is exactly what Dynasty Warriors 10 could benefit from. Now, we move on to the story, which gets a little trickier. As I mentioned earlier, Samurai Warriors 5 reduces the Warring Factions era down to a single storyline. Specifically, the player follows Nobunaga Oda's rise and fall from prominence, as seen from his and Mitsuhide Akechi's perspectives. If I'm making Dynasty Warriors 10 along the same lines, then it stands to reason that I'll need to pick one character to focus on as well. The question is, who to choose? One of the more obvious options is Liu Bei, as the original epic Romance of the Three Kingdoms tends to paint him as the hero of the story. However, I'm not exactly feeling it. He's a fine character overall, but is admittedly somewhat stagnant. He doesn't change his tune of benevolence that much throughout all of his screen time aside from when his sworn brothers are killed. Spoilers, by the way. The one character I intend to follow is none other than Cao Cao. Some of you may disagree, and I understand. Cao Cao could also be perceived as one note, that being a man of determination that believes the ends justify the means. He's ready to do what needs to be done for the sake of the country, and he doesn't exactly deviate from that predication along his journey. However, it's to the extent that this mentality is exerted in the face of morality that I think could be a good angle. There's a fortune teller in the novel named Xu Shao who explains Cao Cao's future. In the translation I've read, he says, "In peace you are an able subject. In chaos you are a crafty hero." Hence where the famous moniker of Hero of Chaos originates. Of course, this could have two meanings. Either he will benefit from the chaos that is sure to ensue, or he will bring about such chaos through his actions. In both scenarios, he is certain to be entrenched in the political turmoil in the coming years. This, I feel, parallels the journey Nobunaga Oda takes quite well. After all, Koei Tecmo has always had the Hero of Chaos and the Demon King mirror one another, even down to their designs. Goatee translates to up to no good apparently. Of course, there are some issues with this proposition, namely the main character's death. You see, and again, spoilers, Nobunaga Oda dies at the end of the campaign in Samurai Warriors 5. They do this because it fits the narrative so well. Mitsuhide Akechi betrays him and launches a counter-offensive which culminates in a duel between the two former friends, costing Oda his life. It's so poetic and the effort to crescendo to it plays out beautifully throughout the game. So what about Cao Cao? Oh, well, his head hurts and he dies. That's it. No spectacle, no grand schemes, nothing. One of his doctors recommends splitting his skull open with an axe to get out what ails him, but unfortunately that doesn't actually happen. So, we'll have to scratch the notion of covering his entire time in the war. Besides, that would be covering a span of 45 years, give or take, which is a lot to translate into the game. Instead, I suggest focusing on a specific section of his life. To elaborate, I think showing him from his start as a bright new graduate of 20 to a blossoming warlord of 45 would suffice. It covers the time of the story before we truly reach the Three Kingdoms era, tackling unifying threats prior to the country splitting apart. I would say that 25 years is an ample timeline for the span of the game, especially considering that Samurai Warriors 5 covers roughly 30 years throughout its main campaign. As for the central conflict for which the game will follow as a rising action to the climax, I now turn to the secondary focus of the story. As was the case in Samurai Warriors 5, Mitsuhide Akechi acts as a foil to the protagonist, even up to the point of causing his death. After you play far enough into the game, you unlock Akechi's storyline, allowing the player to replay levels from a different perspective while also adding entirely new content wholly separate from the main progression. So, following in that game's footsteps, I think Dynasty Warriors 10 could benefit from a similar sidetrack, someone who would act as a foil to our hero of chaos. Personally, I can't think of any better player in our story than Yuan Shao. Hear me out for a second. I know that he isn't one of the other two kingdom rulers, but that's fine for two reasons. Firstly, as stated before, the story in this hypothetical game focuses on the portion of the timeline before the Three Kingdoms were truly established, as Liu Bei was running around without land to call his own, and the Sun family were too focused on fighting for control of their home territory, so neither would be suitable rivals. And secondly, how could I choose one over the other in terms of importance to Cao Cao's campaign? Truthfully, neither really worked to properly establish Cao Cao's early development. Yuan Shao, on the other hand, is the perfect candidate to provide a secondary story. The best part of reboots is the ability to shake up perceptions of aspects of a franchise. Yuan Shao, unfortunately, has become somewhat flanderized in recent outings. He once stood above other men as a paragon of honor and nobility while still retaining a level of charisma about him that translated to a level-headed officer who knew what he was doing. Nowadays, his status as a noble is memed on in this community almost as hard as Ferdinand von Ayer. Leave a like if you got the reference. Seriously though, he's developed this prissy persona that seems too afraid of getting dirt on his illustrious armor to even participate in the battle. I understand he's always thought highly of himself, but he didn't start on this high of a horse. There's hope though. Looking at Samurai Warriors 5, we need not look any further than Yoshimoto Imagawa. Imagawa was, for all intents and purposes, the joke character of the franchise, being a bumbling buffoon who used the Japanese equivalent of a hacky sack as a weapon. In 5, however, he gets the best glow-up in the franchise, becoming a staunch, ruthless opposition to Oda who isn't afraid to decimate his foes with a mighty warhammer. This is why Yuan Shao is the perfect candidate for being the deuteragonist. He is in desperate need of revamping from a design perspective to adequately display him as the threat he was to Cao Cao's campaign. After all, he was the most prominent warlord in the land following the dissolution of Dong Zhuo's tyrannical reign. His character should reflect that. Cao Cao, if he were smart, would be genuinely afraid of Yuan Shao's forces. Of course, prior to them engaging in combat, the two were friends who fought on the same side to bring about peace in the land. We could watch them grow together and apart as their designs as well as perspectives mature over time. Their friend-to-rival progression somewhat parallels how Akechi eventually backstabbed Oda. They could have similar maps to one another during the Yellow Turban Rebellion, the Eunuch Massacre, and Dong Zhuo's insurrection. Then, the two could branch off from one another as Cao Cao focuses his efforts towards Lu Bu's and Yuan Shu's forces, while Yuan Shao focuses on Gong Sun Zan. At the end, they would cross swords at Guandu. Now, historically, Yuan Shao doesn't die here, so we're going to fudge the accounts on this one. If the player is going through the main campaign, Cao Cao will execute his former friend on the battlefield, and the epilogue will focus on eliminating Yuan Shao's children as the story naturally goes. However, if playing on Yuan Shao's side, I say go buck wild and have Yuan Shao execute Cao Cao, with the epilogue focusing on Yuan Shao eliminating the rest of Cao Cao's forces and anyone else who opposes his rule. We'd be off the rails at this point, so why not? Finally, one of the aspects to talk about is the character roster. Samurai Warriors 5 cut the roster down to 37. Now, I could always narrow down the Dynasty Warriors roster based proportionally to how many characters that series had to start, but in fairness, I believe I'll have the same number of characters playable in my hypothetical roster. Let's get way out of the way first. We'd have Cao Cao, Xiahou Dun, Xiahou Yuan, Yu Jin, Guo Jia, Yue Jin, Shu Huang, and Zhang Liao. I figure this is a standard enough list. We have Cao Cao, of course, 2 of his trusty cousins, 4 of the 5 generals of Wei, and the famous tactician Guo Jia to guide them all. For Shu, we have Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei. This is tied for the shortest list on, the list, mainly because this hypothetical game doesn't really focus on the other factions outside of Wei. That being said, Liu Bei does matter in the early game, and later as he teams up with Yuan Shu, and it would be heresy not to include his sworn brothers. For Wu, we have Sun Jian, Sun Ce, and Sun Shangxiang. Again, there isn't much need for the Wu Kingdom, so the numbers have been kept brief. I included the first 2 leaders as well as Sun Shangxiang because, let's be real here, Koei Tecmo feels the need to put in as much eye candy as they possibly can. I'm just being realistic. For Yuan Shao's forces, we have Yuan Shao, Yuan Shu, Yuan Tan, Yuan Shi, Yuan Shang, Zhang He, Xinji, and Guo Tu. Alright, our first new playable characters. Yuan Zhao's forces includes the entirety of the Yuan family as they all have roles to play in the downfall of their lineage. And of course, we have to include Zhang He, the future 5th general of Wei, and Xinji, the future wife of the future ruler of Wei. Guo Tu is another newcomer due to his strategic capabilities, similar to Guo Jia. For the yellow turbans, we have Zhang Zhao, Zhang Bao, and Zhang Liang. No surprises here, they're the three main generals of the Way of Peace. Also, since these three are representative of Heaven, Earth, and Man, aka the Weapon Triangle from Dynasty Warriors 8, and since they'd be the villains in Chapter 1, they could serve as great tutorial bosses should they bring that mechanic back. For Dong Shua's forces, we have Dong Shua, Lu Bu, Jiao Chan, Qin Gong, Hua Xiong, and Li Jue. These characters will suffice during the anti-Dong Zhuo coalition arc as well as beyond, because Lu Bu begins his own empire, and Li Jue carries the torch for Dong Zhuo's forces after his assassination. For Gong Sun Zan, we have Gong Sun Zan, Gong Sun Yue, and Zhao Yun. I know it's not much, but it provides Yuan Shao a decent adversary to contend with prior to combating Cao Cao. And it lets the poster boy Zhao Yun make it into the roster, so this game has that over Samurai Warriors 5. Also, as a side note, even if everything else is ignored here while Koei Tecmo makes the next mainline game, I just have to say, make Gongsun-san a playable character, you cowards. It's been long enough, he deserves it. For other unaffiliated characters, we have He Jin, Xiang Xu, and Tao Qiang. He Jin is here because his death will raise the stakes during the Eunuch Massacre, and Xiang Xu and Tao Qiang are here to further flesh out Cao Cao's path towards Guandu. So, there's my case. While Samurai Warriors 5 didn't necessarily revolutionize the series, what it did manage to do was refresh the formula in visuals as well as story. Whether you prefer this new title or the rest of the series, you have to at least admit that the jump in direction for the 5th installment was a bold move. And what Dynasty Warriors needs right now is a bold move. After the travesty that was 9, Koei Tecmo needs to attempt something different if it wants to win back some of the customers they lost. It has its faults, of course, but this proposed Dynasty Warriors 10, in my opinion, is a step up. Or at the very least, this could prove to be an interesting spin-off. I can see it now. Dynasty Warriors, Hero of Chaos. Or maybe Dynasty Warriors, Prelude to Romance. Either way, I'd be happy. And that's all from me this time. If you liked what I talked about, then consider leaving a like on the video. And if you want to continue the discussion, leave a comment of your thoughts about the subject. But please be respectful. Did you like what I had to say or how I said it? Why not subscribe? If you didn't like it, thanks for hearing me out this long anyway. This is Capital 10 signing off. See y'all some other time.